My ex-girlfriend sent me gingerbread men for Christmas. I think she's trying to kill me. Enough time had passed to make even the most painful memory of senior year a distant blur. I have done everything in my power to keep it that way. I have visited countless therapists and hypnotists and even moved to the other side of the globe just to keep the memories at bay. For over a decade I had managed to not think about her, but the moment I saw the name on the package, all the memories rushed back into my skull with the tenacity of a migraine. From Grace Morgan, the wrapping paper read in big blocky letters. Your ex-lover, clarified a small scribble below, as if I could forget. Dear Pete, haven't thought about you in a really, really long time, but I heard you got married. Congrats. Also heard you guys are expecting. So much for it should be a punishable crime to bring another sentient life into this world. High school. Congrats on the kid. So, since you're all hitched up now, I just wanted to pop in and say goodbye. I read an article about how a lot of marriages these days are broken up because it's so easy to hit up an ex. Just wanted to cut off that temptation for you. If you ever find yourself reminiscing on the nights we spent together as kids, don't. You have a wife. Anywho, just so you know, you're not allowed to write to me when you get lonely. Have a great life. Gracie. P.S. Bake you and yours some gingerbread men. Enjoy. 2 figures of blue pinstriped suits and bright red frosting sit on my table. The gingerbread men have roughly drawn smiles of frosting and dull silver candies for eyes. They sit on my table and I watch them with fear. Before I dated Grace Morgan, I loved Laura Miller. Laura was my first real taste of emotional intimacy, and for the longest time, I was certain she would be my last. We knew each other since we were kids, but we didn't start dating until we were 16. From the night our friendship turned into something more, we were inseparable. Her parents weren't big fans of me, or for any teenage boy interested in their daughter for that matter. Laura's father would drop her off at school early in the morning and then pick her up right after her extracurriculars. Our love, however, snuck past his vigilant eye. For all he knew, school started about an hour before our first homeroom class, and for all he knew, his daughter had a plethora of vague after-school activities which kept her in school well into the late afternoon. I think Laura's mother might have suspected that her daughter was stretching out her schedule to spend time with a boy, but if she did, she never interfered. By the time we reached senior year, she would call me hubby and I would call her wifey. I had no doubt in my heart that we would eventually make those nicknames a reality. For what it's worth, I don't think Laura had any doubts either. We were young and in love and bursting at the seams with hormone-fueled happiness. But then, one Wednesday morning, Laura missed our early rendezvous. She didn't come for homeroom or any of the classes, and she was nowhere to be found when the after-school activities started. This was back before the days of smartphones or social media, but I still had a flip phone that I tried to contact Laura with. She didn't answer any of my texts and all my calls went unanswered. When I got home that day, I saw no other choice than to just hope she would show up in school the next morning. Yet, the longer I sat alone, the longer I tried to come up with an explanation for why Laura would miss school without any warning, the more uneasy I got. A part of me was worried that someone from the school had contacted Laura's parents about our relationship and that her father would lock her in her room until a suitable husband would be found. I knew the man had a short fuse. When the sun set, I hopped a bus to Laura's neighborhood in hopes of throwing a pebble or two at her window to make sure she was okay. There was no car in the driveway. Her house was completely dark. No one was home. The thought of Laura's father finding out about our relationship wasn't pleasant, but I started to hope it was true. I started to hope it was true because in the pit of my stomach I felt an eerie certainty that something much worse had happened. It wasn't until homeroom the following day that I found out what happened. Mr. Algar, our biology teacher, came in to tell us the news. Algar was a shrewd old man who was famous all across the school for a breed of academic strictness that bordered on sadism. When he came into our homeroom that morning, however, his shoulders slumped and his voice lacked all authority. We might be wondering why our classmate Laura has been missing for the past 2 days, he said. He was saddened to announce that she would not be coming back. Laura Miller was dead. She had fallen sick with stomach problems on Tuesday night and died on Wednesday. Her parents requested the service remain family only, but the school counselor was available to help process feelings during lunch break. Past the silence of the room, I could hear the hush of an incoming faint. I excused myself and made for the bathroom. No one stopped me. Not even Mr. Algar. We made no effort to hide our relationship in front of the teachers. The mere act of walking was a Herculean task. I kept on trying to catch my breath, but I couldn't. By the time I managed to hide in one of the stalls, the world was nothing but a curtain of static. I don't know whether I actually fainted or how long I spent in that horrible fugue state. Time had lost all meaning to me. Life had lost all meaning to me. I just sat in that stall with my head cradled in my hands, trying to convince myself it was all just a nightmare. I don't know how long I sat there, but I recall the voice that convinced me I wasn't dreaming. Laura really cared about you. We were working on our biolab on Tuesday, and she wouldn't stop talking about how much she loved you and how the two of you were going to get married. I'm sorry for your loss. It was Grace Morgan. She'd always sit in the back of the class and kept to herself. If it wasn't for the occasional class presentation, I wouldn't even have recognized her voice. I didn't know she was sick. When I left her house, she seemed fine. When we were finishing off the lab, though, she told me that if anything happens to her, she would want you to be happy. Maybe she knew. Maybe Laura knew something was wrong and she wanted to make sure you can move on. When Grace said that to me, I got angry. I yelled at her to get out of the boys' bathroom and leave me alone and never speak about Laura ever again. In that moment, with my face wet with tears and cold sweat, I thought Grace was talking about Laura to console me. I thought she was trying to help. She wasn't. Now, years later, I know she wasn't. I did not cope with Laura's death well. Initially, everyone around me was understanding. My parents pulled me out of school for the next 2 weeks. My teachers, even Mr. Algar, extended all my assignment deadlines, and eventually, all of them, excluding Mr. Algar, gave me automaticas for whatever work was due. For the first few weeks, everyone was beyond understanding. The loss I suffered, however, would take much more than a few weeks to mourn. Sitting in class was never my strong suit. After Laura died, each minute spent behind my desk was agony. I'd inevitably start to daydream, and each and every fantasy took me straight back to her. I was hopeless. Only place I found any solace in were video games. Both my parents worked, so sneaking back home wasn't an issue. Classes were crowded enough to only have one round of roll call during homeroom, so I managed to keep up perfect attendance as well. The few tests and presentations I showed up for went poorly, but I was still somehow managing to coast above failing grades. I didn't wonder why I was still passing my classes even though I was never around to hand in an assignment. I just presumed the teachers were inflating my grades out of pity. I was far too busy playing World of Warcraft to question anything about my life. Decades later, you'll hear folks sing the praises of how they loved the communal aspect of the game, but I didn't interact with a single player. I sat behind that computer and clicked away hours of my life because some primitive part of me liked watching the numbers go up. I hoped that if I sat behind that computer for long enough, I would grind away whatever part of me was making it impossible to move on. That didn't help. It just made me more miserable. I stewed in my pit of digital misery until one day, someone rang my doorbell. I wasn't meant to be home, so I turned up my earphones and continued gaming. The bell went off a couple more times before it finally quieted down. About an hour later, while I was raiding the fridge downstairs, I noticed an envelope slipped under the front door. From Grace Morgan, read the top of the envelope in big blocky letters. Your classmate, clarified a small scribble below. Inside the envelope was a short note written in a rushed hand. Grace said that she missed me in school and that she hoped I would come back soon. She made me something and wanted to give it to me personally, but since I wasn't answering the door, she left it on the front porch. She hoped a bird wouldn't get to it before I did. On the other side of the door there was a chocolate glazed cheesecake. There was no sign of any birds getting to the cake before I did, but I was reticent to touch the cake regardless. I didn't know Grace. Aside from the one strange conversation we had in the boys' bathroom the day after Laura died, I couldn't recall any other interactions I had with her. The thought of eating the cake definitely gave me pause, but my fridge didn't hold anything appetizing and I hadn't eaten lunch. After a long deliberation, I cut off a small, cautionary slice. It was delicious. It didn't take me long to eat the whole cake. The next morning, when I came to have my head counted during homeroom, I found Grace waiting for me in front of the school. I wasn't in much of a conversational mood, but I did feel like I owed her a thank you. She was overjoyed to hear that I enjoyed the cake and, past my protests, Santa Claus is after me. My wrists ached as I swung the hammer down for what had to be the 10th or 12th time. Each time the head of the hammer met the head of the Santa, the sound got softer and wetter, and my hands were starting to get slick with sweat and blood as I staggered back to look at my handiwork. Had I done it? Was he dead? Was it over? But no! That's when I heard it. A stealthy ripping of fabric further down, a darker smear of blood against the red velvet of his pants, and right where his ass crack would be, a black rip as something gray and shiny shot out of the gap in between my legs. Screaming, I leapt halfway up the nearby dumpster and scrabbled the rest of the way over the side, terrified that the thing I'd seen would follow me in there. But no, either it couldn't or it didn't want to, because I could still see its dark silhouette further down the alleyway, peering out from around a stack of broken crates. It seemed to be looking at me, though I couldn't see its eyes. Couldn't say for sure it even had eyes. We stayed like that, staring across the ruined corpse of the red bucket Santa, his head caved in and his ass blown out, for what felt like an hour, and then it suddenly turned and scampered away. It took me another 10 minutes before I could make myself leave the dumpster. I only left then because I knew someone would find the body eventually, and if I was 5 feet away and covered in his blood, there was only one way things would go. Jail, probably followed by some kindly-looking old Santa coming to visit the inmates. Without weapons or a way to run, I'd be dead before the cops could even try to stop him. So I wiped off the blood with trash from the dumpster, zipped up my jacket and pulled my socks up over the cuffs of my jeans before climbing out and stepping around the body. It was hard not to run out to the street, but I didn't want to raise any unnecessary suspicions. Cold air burning in my chest with each panic breath, I forced myself to walk slowly out to the sidewalk and turn away from the direction that would take me home. I didn't have a clear plan for why I took a strange route. Part of it was the vague idea of losing the gray thing if it was following me, though I didn't know that it was. So far, I'd been attacked by 3 different Santas over the last week, but none of them had tailed me as far as I knew, just stalked me for a little while and then jumped me when I was alone. Flagging down a cab, I gave a small, bitter laugh. Over the last week, 3 Santas had tried to kill me. Or at least something that was getting inside of them. I glanced down at the blood around the edge of my nails before stuffing my hand back in my pocket. Over the last week, either the world had gone insane or I had. Either way, I was fricked. 5 days earlier. Looks like Santa must be pissed at you. I glanced up at where Bree was propped up against the customer service counter, smirking at me. What? What do you mean? She hooked a thumb over her shoulder towards a figure slowly trundling along with a few cases of canned vegetables on a hand truck. He put coal in your stocking. She started snorting laughter as Cole Hansen wandered around the corner of an aisle and out of sight. Shooting her a dark look, I shook my head. No freaking way. They put him back on restock now? Half the store's cleaned out and he takes forever. Still chortling, she gave a shrug. Yeah, I guess with so many people being off already, I told Ted he shouldn't hire so many college kids. They're back home and we're stuck with a skeleton crew. I gestured impotently in the direction of where I'd last seen Cole. But he's a moron. I know he's Ted's wife's cousin or some shit, but he can't even use a pallet jack, and he moves like a freaking turtle. I looked back at her, desperation in my voice. Is anyone else working stock? Her face grew more serious as she looked at me with something approaching sympathy. No, and before you ask, I can't stay past 9. Mom's having an early Christmas party and she'll skin me if I don't come straight after work. I nodded. Yeah, that's fine. I'll help him do it. It'll still take hours, but I can't leave until it's done or Ted will be pissed in the morning. Bree gave me a grin. Perks of being assistant manager, right? Snorting, I checked my watch. Half an hour until closing and then I could go start stocking the shelves. Cole would probably have at least 10 cans of peas back out by then. Frick me. You say so. Thanks for the help tonight, man. I swear I'm going to ask Ted to give me another chance with the pallet jack soon. Locking the door, I turned to look at Cole. He was an idiot doofus, but he wasn't a bad guy. Sure, man. No problem. And if he okays it, I'll be glad to give you tips on how to steer it and all, okay? Cole's face brightened. Hey, cool, man. You have a good night, yeah? It was after midnight, and as I turned to look out at the empty parking lot, I saw my car alone in the farthest corner of the lot. Cole apparently wasn't aware of the employee parking rule, as he was already to his car and gone by the time I made it halfway across. I hated this parking lot. It was big and dark, and when it was this late and cold, it felt terribly lonely, like I was the last person left on the planet. Maybe that's why I felt a moment of relief when I heard footsteps behind me. Glancing back, that chill froze in my chest and slid down into my belly. It was a short, fat man dressed up like Santa Claus, walking slowly in my wake across the deserted lot. It wasn't that it was the wrong time of year, it was just a week until Christmas, after all, but why was he out there so late? And why was he following me, slow and quiet, like he was trying to sneak up on me? Trying to dispel the nervous awkwardness I felt, I lifted my hand in a wave as I sped up my pace. Hey there, Santa. He didn't say anything or wave back. Instead, he stopped dead still for a moment, staring at me with eyes that I couldn't see so much as feel, but that felt hot and crazy as they bored into me. It wasn't like I had a real thought process after that. Just an autonomic response of frick this, and then I took off running toward my car. The asphalt was icy and uneven in spots, but I managed to keep my footing. Glancing back once, I saw that he was no longer standing and staring. Instead, he was running hard and fast with his head down like a linebacker or a charging bull. Hard and fast toward me. Despite his size and heft, he might have caught me before I got in my car if he hadn't slipped. But his black boot hit a patch of ice and he slid down onto his face with a soft grunt. I got in my car and looked in my side mirror as I locked the door. He was already getting back up, his face scraped up and his white beard quickly turning red with blood. Oh frick. I cranked the car and made the quick choice to drive forward over the curb instead of backing out and either hitting him or putting myself more into his reach. I made it onto the road with a scraping thud and started to drive away, my hot, panic breaths fogging up the windshield so much I could barely see as I picked up speed and reached the intersection. I made the turn fast, and only when I was 50 yards past turning did I look back in my rear view. He was still behind me, running into the intersection and turning too. That's when the truck ran him over. It was a big truck, one of those with an extended cab and double wheels on the back. Something for construction maybe. Either way, it ran him down at a good speed before slamming on the brakes and skidding to a halt. I had slowed to a crawl but didn't stop, as I didn't want my brake lights lighting up and calling more attention to myself. A man got out. It was hard to say at a distance, but the lights were decent on that street and the guy looked to be young to middle-aged. He ran up to the Santa's body and then I heard him scream. At first I thought it was just he was upset at what had happened or the shape of the man's body, but then he started running away, jumping back in his truck and driving off. I did the same. I was shaking terribly, and it took me twice as long as normal to make my way home, but even when I got inside and locked my door, my mind and pulse wouldn't stop racing. Part of it was just the strangeness of the whole thing, But that wasn't all. It was that when the truck guy had screamed and ran, he hadn't looked like he was running from the scene of running down another person. If he'd been doing that, I figured he would have just focused on getting to the truck or maybe glanced around to see if anyone had seen him do it. But that wasn't what he had done. He'd been looking back behind him, not back at the body, but closer to him and lower to the ground. Like something was chasing him. The expedition. I have always been in love with conspiracy theories back when I was young. There was something extremely intriguing about the mysterious nature of them. The mere uncertainty of whether spaceships or cryptids were real or not aroused a specific kind of curiosity in me. It made me want to go out there and find out for myself. It made me wonder whether those myths and legends were strictly fictional or whether there was in fact some truth to them. Back when I was a little kid, I used to believe everything I saw, and since my parents decided to leave me all the freedom I wanted to view anything across the web, I was able to delve into each possibly imaginable mystery. From various creepypastas to countless internet mysteries, I was engaged in everything. As I started to grow up, I realized that none of the so-called mysteries were real, at least not how I had imagined them. Hence, I ceased to be naive and left behind my guilty pleasure of researching unsolved cases that were characterized by something that was yet to be deciphered, something utterly unknown. I decided to invest my time in sports instead, and when I entered high school, I was able to make the varsity team. Time passed and I eventually reached my junior year. School was not particularly pleasant, especially being the only black guy surrounded by a bunch of Kentucky hillbillies, but I did what I could and managed to befriend some people. In fact, I would go as far as to call myself back then popular, since I had a very easy time with girls, a fact that was supported by my presence in my school's athletic community. As a consequence, most of the